Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me in the Locher Room. I'm Alan Locher, writer, director, and co founder of the Renaissance Theater Company. Donald Rupe is here to discuss his critically acclaimed original musical, From Here. The Renaissance Theater Company is bringing the show to New York City this summer for a 6-week off-Broadway engagement at the Alice Griffin Jewel Box Theater at the Pershing Square Signature Center from June 29th through August 11th. Donald is an accomplished theater maker based in Orlando who has written and helped to create a number of successful theatrical productions, including Nosferatu, Bright Young Things, Flying Lessons, Oscar Wilde, and Jesus Christ Walk Into a Gay Bar, Once I Laughed, Lenox Avenue, and so much more. Please help me welcome to the Locher Room, Donald Rupe. Hey, Donald.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for being here and thanks for doing this.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Well, congrats on the success of From Here. I'd love to start talking about From Here. You staged it for the first time in 2019, just 3 years after the mass shooting at Pulse Nightclub, and now 5 years later, after COVID cut your initial run short in Orlando, you will open in New York City. Talk about the journey and what it means for you to bring the show to New York.
Well, yeah, it's been kind of a wild, longer than expected journey from the first production. We debuted it at the Orlando International Fringe Festival here, which is kind of a huge deal here in Orlando, and it's where I've gotten a lot of my shows have started there. I'll do an original production there, kind of as a workshop, and then expand on the show later on somewhere else in the community. And that was true for From Here. We did it kind of not knowing how special the show was going to be when we first produced it there. And right away we knew that we were telling a story that certainly Orlando needed to hear and experience. And now we're realizing it's even more significant than that, and our desire to tell the story elsewhere and kind of bring this version of Orlando's story um, to New York and to a wider audience.
It's a great place to debut it in some respects, to share that story here in the Big Apple. Um, the events at Pulse took place in 2016, and like I said, you premiered it in 2019, just really 3 years after the events at Pulse. How did the idea for a musical version of this story come to you? And if you can share with our viewers what From Here is about.
When we first began From Here, we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into. I had a desire to tell the story kind of my chosen family, my close friend group, and a little bit about my own journey as a person finding myself. It's kind of From Here started as a coming of age story, really. And as we started writing and as I started working with my friends, I realized there was kind of another story that was really important to tell, which is for anybody who lived in Orlando in 2016 when the shooting at Pulse happened. Um, people here know how deeply we were all impacted by that moment. And as I started to really think about myself and how I've evolved as a human being, I kept coming back to that year and those moments and how much it really changed my perspective of how I move through the world, and about it changed what I thought was most important to me, really, in my life. And that, of course, being my chosen family and my family and friends. And um, so it's important for me to know that for it's important to me that people understand that From Here is really told from kind of a an outsider's perspective of what happened in Orlando and what happened at Pulse. Um, From Here is about, more than anything, it's about how the community of Orlando came together in those weeks following and in those days following what happened. Um, the character, the story of Pulse comes into the show about 45 minutes in, where this friend group starts getting calls, much like the calls many of us received in that on that horrible day. And they hear about the shooting, and of course their first thoughts are about who may have gone out that night, and what happened and how bad it's going to be, and all of that kind of those kind of horribly traumatic moments for so many people. And then it really just talks about how those moments, though horrific in every way, in the days that followed, the response in Orlando and the response from around the world in support of Orlando and in support of the victims and their families was so tremendous, and it was an outpouring of love that I don't think I've ever personally experienced. And so those days really had a very big impact on me personally. And as I started to write this show and conceptualize what the show is about, I realized that was true for so many of us here. And so I really just dug in and told my perspective of why those moments shaped who I am and shaped my relationships and my experiences. And it presented itself in this story, and that we tell in From Here, of this coming of age story, and how this person, this character, who in a lot of ways is inspired by myself, but it's kind of a combination of a lot of people that I know, and how those moments changed his perspective, and how this chosen family became even closer in those moments, and ever since.
Beautifully said. I remember waking up that Sunday morning and calling my friends in Orlando as well. It was a horrific thing for, I think, all of us in the LGBTQ and any community, to realize. I mean, a dance floor, no matter gay or straight, is in many ways a safe space.
Yeah, and that idea of creating a space where people feel safe to be themselves is so essential to so many queer people. And certainly Pulse was that for me and my friends. And a lot of us really feel like we grew up there. It was the place that there was a time in my life where I went there 3 or 4 times a week. My best friend and I lived across the street, and my boyfriend at the time.
Wow.
So we were frequent patrons, and it became kind of the backdrop of a lot of our lives. And so it was, it's surprising to me sometimes when a place can mean so much to somebody. And of course, it's the people that you meet in the place, and the person that you become in the place. But there was something about Pulse that welcomed self-expression and kind of a maturing that I haven't experienced really anywhere else.
I can understand it. For me, it was a place called Feathers in New Jersey. So I understand it well. What was the initial reaction to, I know it's critically acclaimed and you're bringing it to New York, but, were you nervous when it first premiered in your city?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always nervous when I'm debuting something, but of course this show, being so deeply personal, and we all knew going in that it was deeply personal for Orlando as a whole. And it was very important to us to even put this subject matter in a theatrical form was a tough decision, But when you look at the role that art plays and that theater has played for centuries, a lot of times theater is a part of healing, and it is a part of moving forward. And so when we finally decided to move forward, we did so knowing that it was going to be a difficult story. And the first moments that we opened the show, like I said, that the Pulse moment doesn't really come in until later in the show. And we, like you said, it was just 3 years after when we first premiered this show, and we knew almost right away it how personal it was for the audience. We knew it was deep. We knew it was important to us, but we didn't anticipate how important it would be to everyone else. And I think that people were most surprised by the way we tell the story. Like I said, we it was important for me to tell it from a respectful distance and to not include anyone's stories but my own and those who are closest to me. So we don't make any effort to detail the events of that night. We don't get too close to the events out of respect for those who were there. And it's more about how something tragic like that happening in a community can impact an entire generation of people. And by telling that personal story, I mean, the emotional response in Orlando is certainly almost at times overwhelming.
Mm.
And many of us have friends who were at Pulse that night. We did know people who lost their lives, and so there are people coming to see the show locally who are deeply connected to the story that we're telling. And so we feel a sense of duty to honor that and to do it respectfully. And so that first iteration just really cemented for us how important the story was. And it kind of gave us permission to explore telling the story in a deeper way, because at the Orlando Fringe Festival, you're limited to an hour-long show.
Oh, are you? Okay. So you built it after, fleshed it
Yeah,
out more after that. Yeah.
yeah.
What does your hope people take away when it comes to New York? What that they walk out feeling?
I mean, like I said, at its heart, it's about chosen family, and it's about understanding what's actually important in this world and in our lives, which is each other, and loving each other, and living as your authentic self. There's the story centers around Daniel, the main character, and his relationship with his mother, and her coming to accept, who he is fully, and that sort of coming out moment, which
Mhm.
unfortunately is still a reality for so many people. Um, so I hope people, come out with feeling affirmed in who they are, and remembering to love one another, and to hug the people you love just a little longer sometimes. And we brought the show to New York for one night only as a concert
My favorite place.
at 54 Below.
Isn't that a great
And
place? Did you love the space?
we did, yeah. I had visited, as a patron, and we did it, and we invited all of, some New York producer types and, industry people. And what was honestly surprising to me was we weren't sure how the show would be received by an audience that was not people from Orlando. And it was really interesting that the kind of the function of the show changed from that first iteration in 2019 to 2023 in New York City. It served some like documentary like functions, and like telling a room full of people from another city what it was like in Orlando in those days. Stories that are just our reality and our memories from what those days were like in Orlando are actually like educational in a way, and like reminding people like this is what that time was like for us in Orlando. And the reality is that people, we live in an age where gun violence is more common. We live in an age where, more cities, more communities are affected by this kind of tragedy. And we've learned really quickly that a lot of people have a lot of empathy and understanding and have their own context for this kind of thing. So it was meaningful for people in New York. And there's one section of the show where we talk about the Tony Awards, And we talk about how we watched the Tonys that night, because we were together and we're theater people and we didn't know what else to do. And we talk about how meaningful it was when Lin-Manuel Miranda removed the guns from the Hamilton Tony performance, and when he dedicated his Tony Award to Orlando, and how that memory is for us a part of this horrific time, but it was a moment of comfort.
That was the same evening, right? The morning after, the evening after.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that description of documentarian like, because I can relate to the sense of Pulse was my feathers. I get that, but not having experienced what you all experienced is something I hope no one else ever has to do again. But you were sort of shining a light on what that moment was, I guess, when you did it at 54 Below.
Yeah, and it was encouraging in a way that the story and that this show resonates in another city. I mean, it's interesting. Like I was in New York 2 weeks ago, and to this day, you walk into a lot of gay bars there, and there are still reminders and dedications to Pulse. There are stickers with
Yeah.
Orlando or for the 49, and it's a reminder. And I remember traveling during that in 2016, when we would go anywhere, if you tell somebody you're from Orlando and you're in a queer space, the first conversation they wanted to have for a long time was about Pulse. The same is true. It hasn't changed much. And so I know that that outpouring of empathy and understanding and love is still there. So this is kind of our way to, as kind of a thanks and a love letter to Orlando, and a lot of incredible community building happened in the wake of Pulse. Orlando is not the same city that it was before, and of course, it's horrific that it took something like that to make people kind of stand up and love one another. But such is history. People learn their lessons in difficult ways sometimes.
It does. It reminds me a little of New York City after 9/11. I just wish that same sort of empathy and compassion can continue, and I hope it does, because we need more of that, certainly. Tell me about the cast from here. Are you bringing the Orlando cast to New York?
Yeah, that was one of our first decisions, and it was whether or not to cast the show with Orlando folks and bring them up, which of course has a hefty price tag,
Yes,
to
it
be
does.
honest. Or
New York City ain't cheap, Donald.
Yeah, I'm aware. But it just the way that this show tells that section of the story, it wouldn't be authentic if it wasn't with a cast of people who have great ties to the Orlando community. So we're bringing the entire cast here, who we just finished running the show for 3 months at the Renaissance Theater Company, and everybody's coming up. Blake Aburn is the lead character, the protagonist, and he has played this same role every time that we've done the show since 2019. And his perspective it's been interesting to watch him mature into the part. The performance today is very different than it was when we first started, and there's a maturity there, and growing old.
Well,
That
it's got to be
happens.
a heavy load to carry to some degree, because it's an important it's an important role that he is leading in that company, and shedding a light on a period of time that is important to many, not just people in Orlando.
Yeah, and the part was written for him, and it's so obvious. And I've known him for a long time, and I can write for him easier than I can write for myself in a lot of
I love
ways.
that.
And he's,
I love
you
that.
know, he's
We'll talk about our Orlando actors a little later. Do you have a favorite moment in the show?
oh Lord. I have many, of course, favorite moments, but um there's a monologue towards the end of the show where the main character is talking about how Orlando is a changed place now, and he talks about all of the ways that Orlando has changed. And my dorky writer brain, um, it's a the city is a metaphor for himself, right? Like, so he's talking about how much he has changed as well. And I just appreciate that there's so much truth in that monologue. And when you see it in Orlando, the audience is laughing a little extra hard because they know the references are real. And they we talk about Gatorland, and Central Floridians love Gatorland. um, but I love that moment and how deeply personal it is for anybody who knows Orlando.
Well, take me back. Where did your love of theater begin?
Well, I'm from here. That's
Mm.
sort of where the
I
title
know
comes from.
a cattle ranch.
Yeah. I grew up locally just outside of the city of Orlando in Kissimmee, St. Cloud, Florida. And I discovered the arts at a young age. I notoriously kind of had a difficult childhood. I come from a family that didn't have a lot of money, had a lot of substance abuse issues, and we lived kind of in poverty. Not kind of, we lived in poverty. But in second grade, I met the famously my second grade chorus teacher introduced me to singing and a love of music. And I moved around a lot as a kid. In elementary school, I attended 8 different elementary schools.
Oh wow!
And she found me, and her name is Debbie Famey. She's on the board of directors at the Renaissance right now.
Oh, that's
Um,
incredible. That is
yeah,
incredible.
she introduced me to music, and then as I moved from school to school, unbeknownst to me, I found this out later in life, she would call and find out what school I had moved to, and she would call the music teacher there and make sure I got into the chorus class. And she would make sure, like, I got a solo. I remember getting a solo in fourth grade at this new school. I just moved to the new school. It was that chorus teacher. He said, "Yeah, you know why I gave you the solo, right? Debbie Famey called me and told me that I needed to give you a little extra love." And she followed me throughout my whole journey and made sure, kind of from afar, that I stayed connected to the arts.
You're getting me choked up. That is really, you know, the impact that she has had on you. I mean, can you even articulate what that has meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when something's your reality, it's really hard to like step back far enough to realize um how significant it is. But I've she's followed me throughout a lot of difficult things. I exist thanks to several very important people in my life, and she is one of them. Um, my
But a
my
teacher, I'd like to point it out again.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously, how one
yeah. When
person
I
can change truly change the course of your life, Donald.
And it did. My other favorite Debbie Family story is I was working. My mom had died when I was in ninth grade, and
I'm very
that's when
sorry.
yeah, that's part of my trauma. But my I so I moved in with my aunt, who is another influential person. That's how I ended up on a cattle ranch. She lived
Okay.
on a cattle ranch, but I was working at Walmart and as a senior in high school, and I was supposed to go audition for a scholarship, and I was missing my scholarship audition because I had a shift at Walmart and I was working at a cash register. And Debbie Famey and another teacher of mine, Sarah Henderson, came to Walmart, left the auditions, came to Walmart, and insisted that my manager let me go and do my audition. And they offered to work the cash register for me so that I could go and do this audition for college. And of course, the manager let me leave. So they got me out of work, drove me over. I didn't have sheet music. Debbie's friend who was playing piano happened to have some musical theater sheet music in his trunk, and he pulled it out and played it for me. And I got the big scholarship, and so that's my other Debbie, one of my many Debbie Famey stories. Um,
I mean, she definitely saw something in you, though. I mean, that's really, and was really fighting for you. A cheerleader for you.
yeah, and the truth is, she's done that for many other people. Um, she actually commissioned me to. She had asked me as a director because at the time I didn't consider myself a writer. This is like 8 years ago now, 7 years ago. And she wanted me to find a show to present to all the seventh graders in Osceola County to direct. She wanted me to direct it and produce it. And I brought her to Panera one day and I said, well, Debbie, I can't find, because she gave me a list of demands. Like this story it must have history in it. It has to talk about this, and this, all these themes. I'm like, I could not find a show that has all of the themes that you're asking for. So I'll write you one. And she was skeptical. And I was like, come on, just let me I'll write you a musical. So I wrote her a musical called Flying Lessons, which ended up being the first show I brought to New York City for the New York Musical Festival, their last festival. But that was another Debbie Famey commissioned me to do this show.
Wow. I mean, she's been on this journey with you for a long time. I mean, second grade, you said?
Yep.
I mean, that's wow. I'm really like, that is really impressive. Impressive. You went off to college. Did you study theater? Is that what you majored in?
Well, I started with saxophone. I
Oh,
was an
wow.
alto sax player. Um, my band teacher in high school famously told me, you're a much better saxophone player than you are at that drama thing. Because, which may have been true, but by that time I had caught the theater bug. So by my sophomore year, I switched majors and got my degree at FSU for
and,
theater.
and then you ended up back at your high school teaching.
Yeah, and that was another Debbie Famey influence. I mean, uh, anybody who's been that impacted by a teacher, at least at some point in your life, you probably want to be a teacher and hopefully have some sort of impact on others. And I actually loved teaching for a long time. I taught for 7 years, and I I'll tell anyone, I think I learned the most about theater from teaching high school students, because anybody who's ever taught in the arts, that you're kind of everything. You're the director, you're the set designer,
Yeah.
you're the lighting designer, you're the acting coach, you're the therapist, you have to know everything about everything all the time. And I really learned how to do all of this there. And it was as a teacher. I didn't start writing theater until very late in life. Like I said, probably 7 or 8 years ago. Um,
I will come to that in a second. But I think of my high school theater teacher meant the world to me. I would visit her many years after I was long gone. She really had a definite impact on me. I heard you say too that some of your students were some of the most talented kids you had seen.
yeah, I mean, I taught, like I said, at the same high school I went to, and even when I was a student there, it felt like there's great talent in that school for whatever reason. And the same was true. My students went off in some of the best theater schools, and They were just so smart and so resourceful and very, very talented. Some of them I would hire to this
I was going
day.
to say, have you had the opportunity to hire any?
I have actually. One of my former students just became our latest full-time staff member at the Ren. Um,
That's incredible. Paying it back. Do you miss it at all?
Teaching? No. Teaching is the hardest thing I think that anybody has to do. It's just, it becomes your whole life. If you're doing it right and if you love what you're doing, it becomes your everything. I was working just like every good teacher, working 70, 80 hours a week and um in Florida in this political climate, being a teacher is kind of a nightmare. And so no, I as soon as I got out, it was kind of like recovering from PTSD, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a gay teacher in Florida at the moment. Probably any type of teacher in Florida, but being gay and not being able to talk about who you are and that type of stuff, it's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, uh, not many people know this, but a lot of those don't say gay bills got have been defeated, and
Great.
so a lot of what people have heard about Florida isn't precisely true, but it is still difficult. It is They don't make it easy to be queer as a teacher, and
Yeah.
it's hardest for the students. It's hardest for queer students who are,
Oh my
you
God.
know, it's kind of an interesting cultural situation because in a moment where kids their age barely care, there's way more queer kids walking the hallways than there were when I was in school. Um,
100%. I mean, I sort of came out or was gay in the 80s, and even though we didn't talk about it, there wasn't sort of the backlash you were hearing about Florida. Like, I think that for students is worse because it was sort of like it was sort of okay to be gay, and then all of a sudden there's people saying these things that I think just for younger kids can be a real frightening place to be listening to what's going on in the world. Different
it's
than,
insane.
yeah, different than, when it wasn't being spoken about at all. Then you don't know truly what people, you knew it was wrong where people said it was wrong, but interesting, interesting time for sure. You said you didn't step foot in New York City till you were 21. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I said, I didn't grow up with a lot of opportunity, so it wasn't
What was
until later in life.
what was your first Broadway show?
The very first show I saw was called The Apple Tree with Kristen Chenoweth was in it. Um, and that was okay. I
Yeah, I
liked
don't know
I
that one,
loved
and I
I
follow
loved
Kristen.
her.
Yeah.
But my second Broadway show the next night was The Color Purple, um, which to this day remains one of my favorite theatrical experiences.
Was that with Cynthia Erivo and Danielle Brooks?
No,
Or
it was the original. I saw LaShawne's was the lead
gotcha.
at the time.
I think I saw both. I don't
Yeah.
remember the first one as much. Wow, but that's a good show to see.
Oh, it was
Besides
everything.
Debbie, are there other mentors who've helped you along the way?
Um, I mean, countless is the real answer, but like I said, I've had kind of a few like in contrast to like my difficult upbringing. I've had these breakthroughs of meeting people who have really changed my life, and Debbie being one of the first. My aunt that I mentioned, my dad's sister, took me in after my mom died, and she she took me in as one of her own, and we lived in a at the time we lived in a double wide trailer with her kids and her husband, and they on a cattle ranch where, can you imagine? I mean, you don't know me, but can you imagine me on a cattle ranch?
I
I'm a
can
vegetarian.
imagine myself, so sure.
I'm now a vegetarian.
Are you?
Yeah. But she took me in, and so she's a huge influence. And then later on, I started, after I left teaching, it was to create a community theater program at my previous place of employment. And I met my co-founder. His name is Chris Campmeyer, and we both, I at the time, I had no idea. We're not like, maybe not the most likely of friends. He is a straight tech bro. He like is a computer nerd, and he was hired at our previous job as like the tech person, like setting up the internet and stuff. And then he let it out one day that he was a drummer and a guitar player, and I was like, at the time, desperate to meet good musicians. And so I was like, you should have told me that. And I brought him on to play for he played guitar for the first version of From Here, and then he played drums for that show I mentioned earlier for Flying Lessons. And I brought him to New York City to play drums for the Nymph Festival. And I remember distinctly, I can't decide if he hates when I tell this story, but it's just so good. He he offered to pay for his flight and stuff to come to New York, and he offered to pay for his own hotel. And I'm like, no, like, you're coming to play for the show. We're
Right.
going to provide your accommodations. So we did that. The festival was great. We come back, and he sits me down like at one of those horrible cafeteria tables, and he was like, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, oh God, what is it? And he's like coming out. It feels like he's having a coming out moment. I
Yeah.
honestly, that's what I thought he was going to do. Um, and he comes out to me basically as a person of means, as a wealthy person. He's like, I kind of have a lot of money. And I'm like, okay. And but you would have never known, first of all, that he has money. Um, but I had no idea, which is now why it's hysterical to me that I insisted on buying his flight to New York.
Right.
He probably wanted to buy it so that he could like fly at a better time or something.
First class.
But basically, he's like, I want to support you and your work. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And he's like, well, like, we should really do something with this show, talking about From Here. And I'm like, okay, what do you mean? And he's like, well, we should do it in New York. We should bring it so that more people can see this story. And when I tell you, I genuinely did not believe him. I really mean that. I did not believe him. And then we put in our notice. I decided to take a leap of faith. We put in my notice at my job, and then COVID happened. And our plan was to bring From Here to New York way back then in 2020. And in the shutdown, he was house shopping, and he saw this listing for this building. He's like, well, what if we do this instead? Because it's going to take a while for theater to recuperate from this. And he's a genius. He knew within weeks that the pandemic was going to be what it was, and he predicted all of it because he's just smart, and he's reads everything. And so anyway, he bought what is now the building for Renaissance Theater Company in downtown Orlando.
I heard that interview that I listened to where it was he who found it. But what a great story. And I love that, I don't know why, but probably, he's straight. So it's like this interesting combination and friendship that was built out of, his love of music, your love of theater, and seeing what each other could bring to the table. Almost really incredible.
Yeah, and now we're best friends. We talk all day long, all day every day. And he's really influenced me. You asked about influences, and he comes to mind because he has taught me and many of us how to think about this whole world differently in terms of theater and how to produce theater and just how theater functions. He's made me rethink a lot of the conventions of what theater should look like and how people should be paid and the things, the world that we live in. He's just like breaking down misunderstandings.
What did Chris study?
I mean, he honestly, I always forget because it's so out of the world. He studied like um, some sort of science, which he'll be mad at me for not remembering this now. But he ended up in computers. He ended up as a programmer, and he was one of the original engineers for Square for Cash App. And so that's where he made his money. But before that, he was like studying neuroscience or something. It's so weird to me.
Well, that is a great story, and just I love how the friendship was built.
Yeah, now it's like it's had repercussions that you know are almost unbelievable. I when I say that, I every single day I have moments where I'm like, I honestly cannot even believe that this is the life I live. And we've created the Renaissance Theater Company here in Orlando, which we have over 100 employees at any given moment. Um, our our budget after year three is like a $2.8 million budget annually, and um, most of that is to pay artists a living wage in Orlando. And we create these crazy artistic experiences that are kind of redefining theater for me. And um, it's
that
just
is
totally insane.
insane. I knew or understood that it was successful. I didn't realize 100 employees.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the time of year, but when
Right.
we're in production, like right now, we're gearing up for our summer production. It's huge. This thing that that we've created, and again, it was Chris's influence that kind of every step of the way has been like, well, why does the show have to start at 8 o'clock? Or like, why do you have to do it that way? That doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, you're right. It doesn't make sense. Why would we do it that way? Let's do it a different way. Um, so it's pretty miraculous, and seeing the impact that it has on other people on a
Yeah.
personal level, and giving other people a place to create art and a place where hopefully they feel respected at all times. And it's been a big shift in Orlando, I think.
And you're living out your theater dreams.
I'm living out dreams I didn't even know I had. It's like totally unbelievable.
Well, that's awesome. What are you doing this summer at the Ren?
It's a summer experience. It's called 24. So it's like throwing it back to Prohibition. It's a speakeasy experience. It's immersive. There's music and dancing, and there's a big twist and some secrets that the audience uncovers as they come in and experience it. When we got this building, we walked in and it was just a giant empty warehouse. And the first time we walked in, and we were like, well, we should do something. The first show we do should be just let's do a big immersive installation and use the building as an empty building instead of building a stage and building an audience. So we did this big vampire experience called Nosferatu, where the audience moves from room to room, and it's based in modern dance. People compare it to Sleep No More in New York a lot, although it has
Mm-hmm.
very distinct differences, one of which being all of the characters are sexy vampires. Um, but we did this show. We opened it 3 weeks after we got into the building, and the response was kind of insane in that the people coming to see it was not a traditional theater audience, a much younger, much more diverse audience, and people who just don't traditionally spend time in theater. And so right away we're like, okay, well, we can't like do The Sound of Music next. We have to keep doing something for these people. And so it's just kept us on our toes. We're just constantly trying to build the next new thing. So we only do new works, mostly written by people locally in Orlando, and it's just
Truly,
out of this world.
Truly incredible. Well, speaking of writing, you said you came to writing later, later in life, just about 7 or 8 years ago, which I love the story of how you started, because it was an unsolicited critique you got from someone. Would you share that story?
Yeah, so for most of my beginning career, I was more of a director, and then I started producing. But I would, director, the job of a director is to interpret a script and bring
Mhm.
it on stage and hopefully throw your own perspective into the piece as it existed from a playwright's mind. And I had this local guy who I just know he cringes every time I tell this story, and I kind of live for it. Um, I've never told his name, so at least I'm respectful. But he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. I did not know him. I have no idea who he is. And he's like, "How dare you take such liberties with these shows?" Because I would do the shows kind of on their, tilt them on the edge and do something different about them. I would never change the script. I would never change any of the essence of the show, but I would try to like put my own spin on it. And he sent me this long message basically calling me out for taking too much liberty. And I remember thinking, there's something to this. Like, it kind of would be easier if I was just writing the show myself, like, because then I can just do whatever I want. And so that's what I decided, okay, I'm gonna write my own show. Um, and so I always wonder, like, if that guy takes pride in that in that
He
critique,
might.
or if he kind of is ashamed of it.
Did
But I,
you have
go
you
ahead.
studied, the creative writing in school at all?
No, in truth, I always loved writing. As a kid, like in my second grade yearbook, they ask you what you want to be when you grow up, and I had said writer, and there's this like picture of me with a pen. So I always loved writing, and I was always pretty good at it. To be honest, I'm a grammar junkie and all that stuff. But no, I had never even really thought about it until that moment. And now I'm like, I can't imagine doing anything else. Like, why, why recreate someone else's work when you can just create your own? I understand why people want to do that, but for me, I'm like, I have plenty to say about a lot of things, so I might as well just keep writing stuff.
Is there a show you're working on now writing?
Well, I did myself a favor. 24, I was originally going to write all of it myself, and I was like realizing, okay, I'm going to New York in a month. Maybe I should. So I've hired some friends to write most of it, but I'm contributing. So that's the thing, other than from here. But I've sworn to myself to actually focus on from here. My my tragic flaw is I'm constantly working on the next thing. And from here is the first time that I've really invested the time into really trying to make it the best version of itself.
And you
Um,
wrote the book and the lyrics, correct? Of the music?
yeah, I write the the melodies of the songs and the lyrics to the songs, and then Jason Bailey is the arranger and orchestrator for From Here. Um, but I do a lot of it myself, and then they come up with the music underneath, and then the script.
Um, you know, Talking about how you were directing other people's works, do you have a favorite director who has sort of interpreted things maybe like you do?
Um, no, and part of my reason for that is I'm kind of not a fangirl, and like I don't really like um follow people enough to even know their names. Like,
Okay.
there certainly have been productions that I've loved that I've seen in New York, but thus far, so far with my shows, I direct a lot of them still. Um, and honestly, it's just for ease, and because so much of like from here is such a it's such a storytelling mechanism that it's not overly produced. It's a lot of just like pretty old school telling a story. So I directed it myself, and really the actors kind of contribute a lot. But I haven't really worked with a director closely yet. Maybe it's a control thing. I don't know.
It might be. You like the control. You said Color Purple was your favorite show. Is that your ultimate favorite that you've ever seen, musical wise, or do you have?
I will say my favorite performance I've ever seen was Fantasia Barrino in the Color Purple revival. Uh, or she was in the original. Um, that's my favorite performance I've ever seen for sure. And I'm really bad at the what is your favorite show, because my
Okay.
answer is usually just whatever I'm working on currently. Um, but I've become a person who really loves consuming theater. Um, I I rarely dislike anything. I feel like anybody who is an artist and who does a lot of theater, as you do more of it, you have less criticism about other people's work. So I'm kind of a fan of just I like everything, even the stuff that I'm like, okay, well, that wasn't the best show, but I kind of like it.
I mean,
Um,
that's how I feel about, a friend used to bust my chops that I like everything, but I find there's things I like in a lot of things. I might not love everything, but there's things I like. A cast,
yeah,
a cast can go a long way. The project,
absolutely.
it could be very poorly written, but if, watching people work, is sometimes
Yeah.
mesmerizing in my eyes.
Yeah, like the first time I saw Sleep No More was pretty transformative for me.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
the the color purple was transformative for me. I'm a huge Bernadette Peters fan, so
Mm.
anything I've seen her in.
My,
Um,
my friend did Gypsy with her, Tammy Blanchard.
oh wow, that's
Um,
amazing.
um, what was it about Sleep No More that had that impact on you? The immersive element, or
Yeah, it was yeah, the immersion of it all, and the just breaking down barriers of what theater can be. Which as I've started to explore that practically, I realize I've kind of been doing that. That's kind of what I was being critiqued for by that guy that sent me a message, is I've kind of never played by the rules of theatrical convention. I just didn't really know I was breaking the rules to begin with. I was just kind of like do my own like interpretation. The very the very first show I ever directed was the first book show was called Seussical Seussical the musical, but
yeah,
um, I did it at the local community theater, and we kind of took over the complex and painted all of the walls of the theater so that all 360 was Seussified, and I brought the Who's out into the lobby and did kind of immersive elements before I realized what immersive theater really even was. So when I saw Sleep No More, it was kind of a validation that theater doesn't have to be this thing or that thing. It can be whatever you want it to be. Um, so in years since, I've gone back to Sleep No More, and I've had some interesting experiences that I'm like, I don't know if I'm a fan of this anymore. But the first time was everything. The last time I went and I watched somebody eat a sandwich for like 12 minutes, and I'm like, what am I doing here?
I saw it a long time ago. That is wild. How did directing fall your way? Was it something you always considered?
No, honestly, it sprang from teaching, um, because as a teacher, you have to kind of do everything. Um, but I just learned that it's like I'm incapable of not putting my 2 cents in. So I always cram my own perspective, or I find the thing in the show that speaks to me, and I try to bring it out for the audience. Um, and I just kind of tell the story my own way. And part of it is because I'm not, like I said, I'm not really a fangirl, so I don't really Like I'm not good at references. I don't memorize cast albums. I don't watch YouTube videos of other productions. So a lot of times, even if I've seen a show, I'm still making my own choices where a lot of people, at least beginning directors or local directors, steal from other people. I
Yeah,
just have
you're
never.
not at home belting out tunes, show tunes.
No, I really, especially in the last like decade, I just don't listen. My One of my secret weirdo things is I don't really listen to music, which
At
is
all.
weird to people. Yeah, like driving in a car, I just sit there.
Really? Do you
Yeah,
not even a podcast in the car?
no. It's something
Interesting.
about I'm so rarely alone that when I am, I just kind of don't. I just sit there. I don't know. It's very strange.
Well, I even find that now I'm so eager to hear the music from here because it's so interesting that you're not listening to, so you're really bringing like a fresh, in many
Yeah, I
ways,
mean,
perspective.
I'm certainly influenced by the music that I've heard and the shows that I've directed. You can't not be influenced by your experience. But yeah, I don't really write thinking about direct influences, and I also sometimes, much to the annoyance of the people I collaborate with, I don't always adhere to like musical convention either. So sometimes I'll do a song that ends up being in 5/4 for no reason, or um, what I just like let the song go where it goes, and I just expect the people who have to write it down to figure out how
Well,
to make it all work.
I love that. I mean, you're truly an original. Friday, you're coming to New York for from here during Pride Month. Friday kicks off Pride Month. What does Pride mean to you at this point in your life, Donald?
Oh Lord, that's a big question. Um, Pride for me, I'm one of those people I can't get through a pride parade without tearing up. Um, I grew up in a place where, it wasn't accepted and it wasn't normal to be a queer person. And I grew up with a lot of bullying, and it took me a while to really embrace who I am as a queer person. That is what From Here is about. It really Those moments in 2016, in a lot of ways, really lifted what was left of the the things that were holding me back from truly accepting myself and the people around me, and being unabashedly proud of it. And so that is what From Here is about, is that moment of just release and of just fully accepting not just my queerness, but also my trauma and the things that I was holding on to that were holding me back for so long. So Pride for me is fully about my very close friends who now, as I get older, I've spent so many pride parades alongside and marched in them, and so it's a really special time for me.
I hear you. I will be celebrating with friends on Friday night at the Jersey Shore in New Jersey because they do something to kick it off here. So
That's amazing.
it's a good way. Donald, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I am eager to see your success continue to skyrocket. You're a special guy, and I love this success for you. Congratulations.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. You have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Oh, somebody just said, Stan just said, I've had the pleasure of seeing From Here twice in Orlando on opening and closing nights. Really great storytelling. I'm looking forward to seeing the show with a New York City audience.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, it just popped up literally before we were about to sign off. So thanks again for doing this. I'll see you in New York. Ooh, I'll see you in New York.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Thank you To Donald Rupe for joining us here. Remember, From Here will kick off its 6-week off-Broadway engagement on June 29th at the Alice Griffin Jewel Box Theater at the Pershing Square Signature Center. The link is down below right here on YouTube. You can click and get your tickets. Please join me next Wednesday on June 5th when singer and recording artist Cindy Fee stops by. Cindy Fee is best known for performing "Thank You for Being a Friend," the opening theme song to the Emmy and Golden Globe winning series, The Golden Girls. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And if you like to stream audio versions, you can search The Locker Room on your favorite podcast app. Have a great weekend, everybody. I will see you next week. And as always, please stay safe.